Should you buy an apartment in New York City in 2025, or should you wait another year? Well, that is a really big question, and it requires us to look at some of the pros and cons of entering the New York City market. So let's talk about it. Let's break down some of those pros and cons of buying in New York City right now in 2025 and see if we can determine what may or may not be right for you. I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can be up to date on all things New York City real estate, and let's get started. New York City, it's one of the most exciting cities to live in. I've lived here for over 30 years, and people all over the world and all over the United States want to come here and live. But with that said, it is also one of the most challenging real estate markets in the world, definitely in the United States. And you need to have a clear understanding of what you're getting into when you enter the real estate market in New York City. So if you're thinking about buying, the question always is about timing. Should I buy now? Is now in 2025 the best time to buy in New York City? Or should I wait another year or see how the market goes? So let's talk about it. Let's look at some of the pros and cons of buying in New York City in 2025 so that you can have an idea of what action you should take right now. I always love the positive, so let's start with the pros. The first pro is stability. Now, if you're coming from another market, that might not mean as much to you as if you've already lived here in New York City. But stability in New York City is a very big thing. If you're renting in New York City, you have the constant pressure of rents increasing, and they do increase, usually yearly. Perhaps you're in a 2-year lease and you can put that off for 2 years, but your rents are going to increase. And for many people, that means that the rental increases also price them out of their unit, which means you have the pressure of moving. It's very common in New York City for people to have to move every few years, and that is a stressful way to live. Buying something in New York City is a huge pro because you are stable. You're then going to have an investment that you're going to be able to live in for hopefully many, many years to come. I know that personally, whenever I bought into my co-op, it was a great pressure off my shoulders. I had moved around quite a bit, and I was ready for that stability that buying offered. And indeed, I was able to create a beautiful home that I've been in now for years without the worry of rental increases and possibly having to move again. Now, we know that anything can happen. Life can change. You may face some hardships. Perhaps you lose your job. So stability also comes with the potential for instability. Of course, we know that. But still, buying in New York City provides you a level of stability that is very welcome to most New Yorkers. Now, the next pro is that when you buy into something, you're building equity. This isn't that different than anywhere else in other markets in terms of buying and making a good investment and building that equity. However, the difference is that you're not throwing away money on rent. And in New York City, the rental prices are at an all-time high in 2025, and they're projected to keep going up. So if you move here, you're going to need a place to live, and you have some choices: to pay those high rents and have that money just disappear every month, or to buy something and start building equity in something that most likely is going to be a good investment and most likely appreciate over time. New York City is a strong market for that sort of thing. So building equity in New York City is a great advantage to anyone who can buy here. Another pro is that New York City is not like other markets. Why is that important? In general, when you hear that the housing market in the United States is really going south, horrible things are happening, perhaps we're on the brink of a housing crisis, usually New York City and Manhattan are doing the opposite, or at least staying very stable. And that is in part due to the structure of our buildings. The co-ops and the individual companies that own the building, the structure of our real estate in New York City is completely different from the rest of the housing market in the United States. It doesn't mean that we're immune to everything and immune to problems, but it does mean that our market is usually much more stable and does not respond to the other kinds of obstacles that may happen out there in other markets in the United States. So what does that mean for you as a buyer in 2025? Well, that means that in general, New York City is a good, strong investment, and that over time, your investment most likely is going to appreciate. We have all sorts of charts showing that over time, New York City real estate has just kept going up and appreciated. It's never really sunk down. We didn't respond to the housing crisis in 2009 in the same way that other markets. We did not crash here. So New York City is its own unique market. It responds to its own kind of data. And because of that, it makes it a good, strong investment. And you most likely will see a good ROI on that investment. And that brings us to the next pro, which is building wealth. You're buying into one of the most competitive and exciting real estate markets in the United States, if not the world. And your ROI, as I mentioned before, is going to be good over time. It may not be immediate because we don't have a lot of turnover, we don't have a lot of flipping of apartments, but if you're looking for a long-term investment, it will appreciate and most likely give you an ROI. Also, going back to the idea of renting, if you buy a condo particularly in some co-ops and look at that as an investment property, then you're going to be on the other side and you're going to be able to take advantage of those high rents. And again, over time, the New York City rental market for landlords is a good, solid investment. Our cap rate may be a little bit lower than other markets. In general, we look between a 2 and 3% cap rate. That's considered good. Anything above 3% is considered really, really good. But the difference is the vacancy rate, where in other markets, apartments can stay vacant for very long periods of time and the landlord loses money. In New York City, we're such a huge rental market that you're probably going to get your apartment rented and rented fairly quickly if it's priced well, and it's going to stay rented. So your vacancy rate is going to be very low, which makes that cap rate very appealing for the long-term investment. So if you want to use real estate to help build your wealth, New York City is the place to do it. In terms of what's happening right now in 2025 in the New York City real estate market, we have been in a somewhat neutral market, meaning we're not in a seller's market, we're not in a very big buyer's market, we're pretty much neutral. And that's for a lot of different reasons. For example, the fluctuating interest rates has affected our market, maybe not as much as other markets, but it's certainly been a factor. So we are in a neutral market. What does that mean for buyers? Well, we're not really in a buyer's market, and quite frankly, Manhattan is never really in a huge buyer's market. We don't have that sort of flash sale and fire sale sort of mentality here because of our structure of our buildings with co-ops and co-op rules. But we do very much move into seller markets at times. And in general, many neighborhoods, popular neighborhoods like the West Village, Greenwich Village, the East Village, Soho, places like that remain in a seller's market. For those markets to be in a neutral market, that actually is a plus for buyers in 2025 because people who want to and need to sell are going to have to make a little bit more concession than what they normally would have to do in New York City. It does not mean that their investment has gone bad. It doesn't mean that their apartment hasn't appreciated. It just means that they may not be able to sell for that top price that they would be able to if we were in a typical seller's market in Manhattan. So for buyers right now, there are still deals to be out there. If you can find the right place for you, you most likely can get a good deal right now in 2025 here in Manhattan. And finally, it's not really a pro, it's more of a thought on the pro side, and that is waiting could cost you. I just mentioned that we're often in a seller's market in the New York City market, and when we go into that seller's market, some of those really desirable neighborhoods means that you have to at least pay asking. Oftentimes there are going to be competitive bidding wars, so you may have to bid up and pay much more than what asking would have been. Because we're in that neutral market right now and buyers have a little bit of leverage, waiting until next year could actually actually cost you. So it may be well worth your time and effort to buy in 2025 in New York City. All right, so those are some of the pros. Let's look at some of the cons so that we have some balance here, because as exciting as New York City is, it can be a very difficult place to move into and a very difficult market to buy into. So let's talk about some of the key cons. The number one con is a barrier to entry, and that is your high upfront costs. New York City is a very competitive market. It's a very expensive market. So you're not only going to be paying very high prices for apartments compared to other markets, but you're also going to have a high buy-in. And most of that is going to start with your down payment. Now, I've mentioned that we have co-ops in New York City, which means that each building is a separate business with a separate board, and the board of every co-op gets to make its own rules because basically it's a private company. That means the boards actually control the amount of down payment they require to be put down to be able to buy into the building. In general, a down payment on a co-op is around 20%, but in some areas it can be 30%. In some buildings it can even be 40%. Rarely is it less for a co-op. For condos in general, the down payment is 10%. Both of those sets of down payments are immensely more than what you would pay out in other markets, where really the bank determines what you have to put down. And perhaps the bank says, hey, you're a really good client, we're gonna let you put 3% down, you're a new homeowner, a first-time buyer. None of that applies in New York City. If the co-op says 25% down, it doesn't matter what your bank approves you for, you must put 25% down. On top of that, you're going to have all sorts of closing costs. Closing costs on co-ops in general are about what you would expect for closing costs in the rest of the market, but on condos, they can be immensely higher, and certainly if you're buying into new development, you're talking about closing costs upwards of $50,000. So total, between your down payment and your closing costs, the buy-in for New York City is quite high. While that is a con, there are ways that you can prepare for that. So if you are prepared and you understand what you're buying into, then you can actually turn a con into something more positive and get into the New York City real estate market. But you must be prepared financially to be able to buy here. Another con that most people don't realize is the additional financial criteria that must be met to be able to buy into a building. This predominantly applies to co-ops. But again, co-ops make up about 80% of the inventory, so chances are most people who are considering buying will be buying a co-op. Co-ops, again, because you're buying shares into this company, can actually make their own rules, which means that they can determine what kind of financial criteria that the buyer needs to have. Again, not the banks. You may be approved for a fabulous mortgage, a huge amount, no problem, but you may not actually be able to buy into certain co-op buildings because they have different financial criteria. For example, they may want to see some post-close liquidity, which means 2 years worth of savings or assets in the bank at the time of closing that would equal 2 years worth of maintenance and mortgage payments ready to be liquid. Some people, especially when they're moving and paying all of these costs, don't have much liquidity at the end of the day, and that might knock you out of the running for certain buildings. So there is an additional set of criteria. That's just one example. There are many criteria that must be met that you would have to meet to be able to buy in New York City. That's surprising for a lot of buyers, and a lot of buyers are not prepared. Again, like your down payment, as long as you understand what you're buying into and you have some really good guidance from a really great agent, you're going to be financially prepared to get through this. So you can turn this con into a pro, but you must know what you're doing and you must be prepared financially. Another con of buying right now in 2025 is that common charges for buildings have been going up. It is unavoidable. We are subject to the same kinds of costs that the rest of the world and the United States are subject to. In other words, construction costs, costs for plumbing and repairs and everything like that that goes into maintaining a building. All of those supplies have gone up, so inevitably those charges must be covered. So over the past couple of years, we have seen an increase in common charges. Now, common charges for buildings do increase periodically, but it it is not like renting. It's not like you're going to have a huge increase every year and that, you're going to have to deal with that every year. But there are incremental increases to maintain the building. It's just at this point in time, because of the pandemic and because of the recovery and because of the additional costs and inflation, a lot of buildings' common charges haven't been quite enough to cover all of those increases. So therefore, common charges have increased. It doesn't mean that you can't find buildings that have very reasonable common charges, but understand that your bank for your mortgage is going to look at your mortgage payment and the common charges of a building and combine that to approve the amount that you will be approved for. In other words, if a building has a very high maintenance, you're going to get less of a mortgage approved. Those two things go hand in hand in New York City. So again, unfortunately right now, it's just the way things are. Costs have gone up. Therefore, maintenance and common charges of buildings have gone up. Another con that's happening right now in 2025 is that we actually have limited inventory in New York City. A lot of that has to do with sellers being a little bit hesitant and realizing that there's a lot of fluctuation with the interest rates, so they have pulled their apartments off the market. But we have been seeing a trend for about a year now of low inventory and lower inventory than past years. So what does that mean for buyers? Well, again, people who need to sell and want to sell are probably willing to negotiate a little bit more than they normally are, but it also means that you have limited inventory to choose from. If you can find something that works for you, you are in great shape to buy in 2025. But many buyers are just not finding that dream home, especially for the prices that are out there. They're just not finding what they want, so therefore they're waiting for more inventory to come on. If more inventory does come on, for example, in the spring, in our big spring sales season, then there might be more competition. So it's gonna be a little difficult for buyers who are buying right now in 2025 with this low inventory to find what they want or to wait. Will it be different next year if you wait a year? Who knows? None of us are fortune tellers. We can't predict what's going to happen in the New York City real estate market, so we cannot know what will be different next year. But right now, you do have to consider that there is limited inventory on the market. And the final con is that you are entering into one of the most competitive and complicated markets in the United States. You must be prepared for this level of competition. You can't just walk in and decide that you want to buy something. There are so many layers to being able to buy something. And a selling agent's responsibility is to make sure that they're looking at buyers from the financial criteria as well as from the seller's desire to get the highest price and all of that kind of normal real estate market. But it doesn't matter if you're offering the highest price if you don't have the financial requirements, if you don't meet the other requirements that a co-op board would require of you to be able to buy into that building, then you're not a valid buyer. So it is a complicated market, it is a competitive market, and my best piece of advice is to always work with a buyer's broker that really understands the business, that knows how to get buyers through all of these processes as efficiently and as painless and hopefully as stress-free as possible so that you can realize your goals and buy that dream home in New York City. So there you have it. We've looked at some of the pros and cons of buying in New York City right now in 2025. What do you think? Is it time for you to buy or should you wait another year? I hope some of this information has been helpful. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all things New York City real estate. If you're ready to find your dream home in New York City, take a look below at all the different ways that you can get in touch with me. I would love to help you achieve your real estate goals in New York City. I'll see you next time.